Hey, brother. Do me. Hey, don't do it. Don't do it.
There's always been motive. Has he ever talked about that?
Nothing that would make sense to anybody. I realize I get that question all the time, and there's nothing that makes any sense. I mean, he was angry, depressed, made a really horrible decision in that moment of anger and depression.
This is the father of Alec Kreider, who brutally killed a happy family. And why he did that, he will know in this video.
On the morning of May 12, 2007, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, woke to a tragedy so dark that it would leave even seasoned investigators stunned, and it began quietly, inside a home that seemed like any other. The Haynes family residence in the peaceful suburb of Mannheim Township. The Haynes were well known in their community. Thomas, 50, a respected businessman. Lisa, 47, a loving mother and active volunteer. Kevin, 16, a bright and well-liked student at Mannheim Township High School. And Maggie, their daughter, also a student and full of life. It was a household that radiated normalcy, a place of trust and love. And yet, on that spring night, it became the scene of unthinkable violence. Maggie awoke to a nightmare. Screams, confusion, and then a horrifying discovery. Her parents had been brutally attacked, her brother Kevin fatally wounded, and the home they shared now a silent witness to murder. What Maggie did next, fleeing for her life, pounding on neighbors' doors, calling for help, would save her, but it could not save the rest of her family. Police were called to the scene and entered a house soaked in blood. The carnage they found spoke of rage and precision. Thomas and Lisa had suffered multiple stab wounds. Kevin had been attacked in his own room, and yet there were no signs of forced entry. This was no random intruder. The evidence suggested familiarity. Whoever had done this had moved with confidence through the home. Investigators quickly began piecing together timelines, alibis, and relationships, and the question that kept echoing was simple but chilling. Who could have done this? As detectives combed through the crime scene, they found nothing to indicate a burglary gone wrong. Valuables were untouched. The attacks were targeted. And then, as they turned to the surviving daughter Maggie for answers, another name surfaced. A friend, a familiar face, someone, and they knew had been around the family often. Alec Kreider. At first, it seemed impossible. Alec was Kevin's best friend, a boy who had shared meals with the family, who had slept over, whose presence in the house would not have raised alarms. But soon, inconsistencies began to surface. Neighbors recalled seeing Alec near the home late at night. Others noted his behavior had changed in the days after the murders. Quiet, withdrawn, something unspoken lingering. And then came the call that would change everything. Days after the murders, Tim Kreider, Alec's father, received a confession that no parent ever expects. His son, Alec, admitted to killing his best friend and his friend's parents. Imagine that moment. The shock, the disbelief, the pain of realizing that the person you love has done the unthinkable. Tim faced a decision that would haunt him forever, and he chose to do what he believed was right. He alerted authorities, handing over his own son to face justice. When police arrested Alec on June 16, 2007, the community's grief deepened into shock. The boy they once trusted, who blended into classrooms and family dinners, was now accused of a triple murder. Investigators searched Alec's home and found a bloodied knife hidden away, matching the wounds on the victims. Blood traces and DNA tied him to the crime scene. In his private journal, dark thoughts emerged, writings that hinted at disdain for others and an unsettling mind. And yet, there was no clear motive, no robbery, no long-standing feud, only hints of resentment and inner turmoil. The prosecution would later say that Alec simply wanted to kill, that something inside him had turned cold, that Kevin's family had been targets of opportunity. For Maggie, the survivor, the pain was compounded. The murderer was not a stranger, but her brother's closest friend. Court documents describe a confession that was chilling, in its calmness. Alec told his father and later investigators that he entered the Haynes home with the intent to kill. He moved silently, attacking Thomas and Lisa first, then turning on Kevin. And each blow was deliberate. Afterward, he left, washed up, and returned to life as if nothing had happened. There was no public trial. Alec Kreider pled guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder, sparing the community the agony of a prolonged courtroom drama, but ensuring he would spend the rest of his life in prison. In 2008, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. His youth did not protect him. Pennsylvania law was clear. The sentencing hearing was somber. The courtroom heard statements from family members, including Maggie, who spoke of unimaginable loss. Prosecutors emphasized the brutality and betrayal, while Alec remained mostly quiet. The community struggled to reconcile the boy they knew with the crimes he committed. And for Tim Kreider, there was the unique and agonizing position of being both the father of a killer and the man who turned him in. He would later write about that pain in his memoir, Refuse to Drown, exploring the conflict, guilt, and grief that defined his life after the confession. As years passed, the case remained a reference point in discussions about teenage violence, mental health, and family responsibility. It raised haunting questions. Could anyone have seen this coming? Could it have been prevented? What darkness hides behind familiar faces? And perhaps the most poignant question of all, how does a parent choose justice over love? After Alec Kreider's arrest, the shockwaves through Manheim Township were impossible to contain, because this was not a faceless villain or a shadowy stranger, but a boy who blended seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life. And that made the violence almost impossible to process. Media outlets descended on the quiet Pennsylvania community, reporting each detail as it emerged, and what stood out most was not only the brutality of the crimes, but the utter lack of warning signs that anyone could clearly point to. Alec was described as intelligent, athletic, and seemingly normal, though some peers would later recall a withdrawn side, occasional dark remarks, and a sense of isolation that he kept hidden behind a polite exterior. The journals found in his room revealed disturbing fragments, writings about resentment toward happy people, and an internal struggle with feelings of inadequacy and anger. Yet there was no obvious trigger, no clear motive that explained why a teenager would turn on the people who welcomed him into their home. Investigators pored over every aspect of Alec's life, school records, friendships, online activity, and found only hints. A boy wrestling with emotions he did not share, a young mind capable of compartmentalizing violent fantasies. When he confessed to his father, it was not with tears or excuses, but with a chilling simplicity. He admitted to walking into the Haynes home and attacking them in their sleep. That confession would become the linchpin of the case, the reason authorities could act swiftly. Tim Kreider, his father, described in interviews the unbearable position he was in, loving his son, but knowing justice had to prevail. Turning Alec in meant losing him forever, but he could not ignore what had happened. Detectives later praised him for his courage, acknowledging that many parents might have hesitated, but his decision brought closure and ensured the safety of others. Meanwhile, the surviving daughter Maggie faced the unimaginable task of rebuilding her life, living not only with grief, but also with the knowledge that her brother's killer was someone she once trusted. Friends and relatives surrounded her with support, but the trauma was deep. At memorial services for Thomas, Lisa, and Kevin, the community came together, their sorrow evident, but there was also confusion. How could this happen? Penn here? Why would Alec do this? Prosecutors pieced together a timeline. Alec left his house late that night, carrying a knife. He entered the Haynes residence without resistance. He struck quickly and quietly. Forensic evidence confirmed his movements. Blood patterns matched his actions, and his shoes left impressions that investigators could trace. In interviews years later, former classmates spoke about the case with disbelief, saying Alec was the last person they would have suspected. The trial phase was brief because Alec entered a guilty plea, avoiding a jury trial, but sealing his fate. The sentencing brought no real answers. The district attorney stated, "Some crimes simply defy explanation," and many felt that was the truth here. The story did not end in 2008. Alec's life behind bars became another chapter of tragedy. Reports indicated he struggled with depression, regret, and isolation. In January 2017, at the age of 25, Alec took his own life in prison. It was a final act that reopened wounds for the Haynes family, who were reminded again of what had been taken from them and what was lost on both sides. Tim Kreider, who had once turned his son in, spoke publicly about the need for awareness around teen mental health and family communication, hoping that others might be spared a similar fate. His book, Refused to Drown, became not just a memoir, but a warning and a plea for understanding. The Haynes murders were covered by numerous podcasts, television programs, and articles, each retelling the story, each searching for the elusive why. On Investigation Discovery's Nightmare Next Door and Oxygen's Killer Kids, the case was dissected, and experts weighed in on juvenile crime, peer relationships, and hidden anger. Online communities discussed the haunting details, and true crime enthusiasts examined every piece of evidence. But no theory fully satisfied the longing for an explanation. At its core, the tragedy of the Haynes family murders lies in the betrayal of trust and the unpredictability of human behavior. A friend became a killer, a home became a crime scene, and a father became the unwilling instrument of justice against his own child. For Maggie, every retelling is a reminder of her loss, and yet her resilience is part of the legacy. She survived, she testified, and she continues forward. The memory of Thomas, Lisa, and Kevin lives on through those who loved them and through the cautionary tale their deaths have become. Each name, each moment, is a reminder that violence can erupt even in the most ordinary places, that danger can wear the face of a friend, and that sometimes the greatest strength is found in the hardest choices. This first part of the story lays the foundation of horror and heartbreak, showing the events, the confession, and the sentencing, and sets the stage for a deeper look into the aftermath, the lessons, the scars, and the broader questions about trust, youth, and the hidden battles inside the minds we think we know. The story of the Haynes family murders does not end with Alec Kreider's conviction. In many ways, that was just the beginning of a long and complex aftermath that rippled through families, courtrooms, schools, and a community struggling to make sense of the unthinkable. After Alec was sentenced to 3 life terms without parole in 2008, conversations began about what could have driven a teenager to commit such a horrific act, and those conversations were often tinged with fear. If a quiet, seemingly normal boy could do this, what signs are we missing in others? Law enforcement, mental health experts, and journalists all weighed in, but few clear answers emerged. What did come to light were fragments: a father's testimony of a withdrawn son, journal entries full of dark musings, occasional comments that hinted at frustration and resentment. Alec's writings showed disdain for people he considered superficial or happy, and while they were not direct roadmaps to murder, they revealed a mind struggling with emotions it could not or did not express outwardly. Schools and parents in the area began looking inward, wondering whether more could have been done to notice or intervene. At the same time, the Kreider family bore the weight of dual roles: victims of circumstance and parents of a killer. Tim Kreider, the father who made the agonizing choice to turn in his son, became a voice for accountability. But he also spoke openly about the pain of losing Alec, first to violence, then to the prison system, and finally to suicide. His book, Refused to Drown, would explore these themes in depth, describing Alec's childhood, the warning signs that were missed, and the moment that altered everything. The Haynes relatives, meanwhile, lived with an unfillable void. Maggie, the surviving daughter, was thrust into a life she never expected, grieving parents and a brother, enduring court processes, and confronting the betrayal of someone she trusted. Community support was strong, but trauma does not fade easily, and each anniversary brought renewed sorrow. The media kept the story alive, with television specials and podcasts revisiting the case, dissecting motives, and speculating about Alec's state of mind. In those programs, law enforcement officials described Alec as methodical and detached during interviews, rarely showing remorse. Psychologists debated whether he was driven by mental illness, anger, or something darker. The lack of clear motive only deepened the mystery, making the case a haunting reminder that sometimes violence cannot be neatly explained. Then, in January 2017, came another shock. Alec Kreider was found dead in his prison cell, an apparent suicide at the age of 25. For many, this final act reopened NDs and raised new questions. Why now? What thoughts occupied his mind in those final days? Reports suggested he had struggled with depression and isolation in prison, though official statements were sparse. His death sparked conversations about juvenile sentencing, mental health support behind bars, and whether some tragedies simply multiply. Tim Kreider once again found himself in the public eye, speaking about his son's death with a mixture of sorrow and candor, urging families to talk, to listen, and to act when something seems off. The case began appearing in discussions about juvenile justice reform, as some argued that life without parole for young offenders may not allow for growth or change, though others countered that Alex's crime was too severe for leniency. Whatever the legal debates, the emotional reality remained. 3 innocent lives were lost, and a 4th ended in despair. The Haynes murders continue to resonate in true crime circles because they contain elements that disturb deeply. The betrayal of friendship, the sanctuary of home violated, the role of a parent forced to choose justice over loyalty. Each retelling reminds listeners and viewers that the face of danger can be familiar, and that sometimes the hardest truth to face is that evil can come from within our trusted circles. Schools in Lancaster County have since incorporated more conversations about mental health, peer pressure, and communication, and law enforcement agencies sometimes reference the Kreider case in training about warning signs and crisis response. For the Haynes family's surviving members, life has moved forward, but always with a shadow. Maggie has spoken occasionally about her loss, focusing not on the killer, but on honoring her parents and brother. Friends remember Thomas and Lisa as loving, supportive, and active in their community, while Kevin is remembered as bright and not D-kind, a teenager full of promise. Their memories stand as a counterbalance to the violence, a reminder that lives are more than the way they end.